If you want to be more effective in your work and in your life, and you'd like to have more confidence that you're meeting your intentions, this is where it begins. Welcome to Do Busy Right, helping you organize your information and manage your attention so that they work for you, not against you. We educate you and encourage you by discussing ways to be more effective, not more exhausted. Let's do busy right. Hi there. Today I want to talk about something fundamental to the success of any team or organization, and that's group information management. I often focus on personal information management, that is, keeping your own stuff organized where you can find it. But the reality is that the direct applicability of that technique to the entire organization you're in is actually pretty limited. It makes you a better team member. It helps you deliver more consistently on your commitments, and it helps lower your stress. And all these are great things, but it really doesn't change the way your operation works beyond just your own attitude and skill, which are great things. Don't get me wrong. But today I want to shift to showing you how a seemingly individual skill is in fact the key to unlocking effective shared knowledge and group understanding within your team, within your organization. So my goal here is to challenge some long-standing but suboptimal approaches to managing collected information and propose a more effective and, frankly, more straightforward way to proceed along this path. So this is critical because every team, every group, by its very definition, has a fundamental need to achieve a common understanding of some area of knowledge or some shared perspective on an issue or a set of issues. We don't want to create a team of clones. That's not useful. But we do want to create a team of skilled information managers. And we'll talk about what that looks like in the organization. In this scenario, individuals gather and develop and share information with each other on the team to build a coherent shared view of the world relevant to their work. So the challenge we face is that, while organizations can embody certain process knowledge, like an embedded mechanism in a factory or some logic business rules within a piece of software, the vast majority of an organization's knowledge resides within the individual brains of its people. So mastering group information management is not just about tools and systems. It's about making sure your team can effectively share and exchange that crucial information, whether it's through conversations, policies, emails, chat. If you manage teams or groups of people, or even if you're a team member yourself, understanding this problem and its solution is crucial for your team's effectiveness and its ability to function as a cohesive unit. First, we'll talk about why group information is managed. And the acronym, of course, for personal information management is PIM. So group information management is GIM. Okay. So why is group information management needed? Okay. Well, we talked about this a little bit in the introduction. Our personal information management is great, but we don't have the space to be really the information manager for our entire team by ourselves. And so we want our teammates to also be good at managing their own information. And teams, if they need anything at all, need a common understanding and perspective of what's going on. So again, we want to share knowledge and information around the issues that the team faces, the work that the team needs to do. Now, when we look at group information, some might say group knowledge, okay, it's important to recognize what we're trying to do here. So group knowledge is this very shared perspective, okay? Now, that does not mean necessarily that everybody sees the exact same picture. Okay. You'll remember the story of the six blindfolded guys and the elephant. Okay, they each touch a different part of the elephant, and each comes back with a story that doesn't seem to talk about an elephant, but when you put them all together, it describes the elephant. One of them feels the side of the elephant, says, "Oh, it's a big wall," and the other feels the leg. "Oh, it's a tree trunk," and one feels the elephant's trunk. "Oh, it's like a snake." But together, those perspectives combine to show the overall idea of what an elephant is. So in many ways, this shared perspective, okay, this complete perspective is developed through information sharing and through each of us learning a specific aspect of the scenario or the situation and sharing that to some degree with others. Okay. But it's limited how much we can actually share that just because communication's tough. Okay. Finally, we talked a little bit about organizational knowledge. And yes, there's some degree to which organizational knowledge is embedded in policies and tools and physical systems. But that's a fairly limited set of information. And it's also very difficult for those artifacts to communicate that information out to us. Okay, particularly things like what's the business logic in software, or what's the logic of a physical process. We have to go out there and observe it, and sometimes that's a challenge. And then we said the majority of what we want to know is actually stuck in people's individual heads. So the traditional idea of GIM systems, okay, is to use a shared document repository that everybody has access to. Okay. And that access is controlled via typical security kinds of measures, like logins and limited permissions in some cases, all these kinds of ideas. Okay, but they're all looking into the same huge data store, information store. Okay. Secondly, in this shared document repository, most people think that there have to be no private records. A lot of companies go to great length to ensure that no individually generated information about work resides on any single computer, because it would be locked up behind a user ID for that computer. Okay. So we want to get all this information out into a shared repository. So that's important, right? But it's hard to share our perspective out into that repository, at least completely. And recovery of that information can be a challenge. Okay. So that's one kind of set of issues with this shared document repository. Another set of issues, a challenge here, is designing the overall storage schema. Okay. The pattern of storage so that people can store it properly so that it gets found easily again the next time they need it. And this is a huge challenge. Okay. And the reason is because that repository is usually organized by a single individual. And that may be a team member, it may be a manager, it may be somebody that's brought in externally to organize this information. So we'll call that individual the librarian. Okay. And the information is schema, the structure of the storage, the schema is based on their thought patterns and based on their terminology. All right. But once that schema is complete, the team members are expected to understand it and use it effectively. So it's sort of a one-size-fits-all model. And the individual team members have to learn that schema and really learn it at a deep, deep level so that they can utilize it effectively. All right. In some ways, you've got to try to alter the way your brain works if you're in this situation as a team member. I'll give you an example. So if the librarian thinks in terms of aqua and you think in terms of blue-green, bluish green, then that's a communication challenge. That's a challenge of your different thought patterns. And if they design the schema to talk about aqua, then every time you think blue-green, you've got to translate to aqua. Okay. That can be challenging, and it's certainly time consuming. So this one size fits all model. Okay. We're going to design the perfect schema and 8 different people are going to use it. Okay. That's an immense design challenge. It's difficult and time consuming because the approach that most people take is I'm going to try and build some superset of the relative understandings of all the different people on the team. And it's really hard. And then, oh, by the way, you can't get it right because of the problem we talked about a minute ago of this making meaning thing that the individuals do. And so there's lots of examples of how this might work out. But these are really kind of issues with that, right? If you design it then and you structure a schema, it becomes fairly permanent and expensive to change. Okay, because then you have to come back in and completely restructure the thing. Okay, so that's one thing. The second thing is it's fairly inflexible because it's hard to add to it. It's hard for anybody to add to it other than the expert that created it. So you're creating a single point of failure. When I say add to it, I don't mean add information to it, although that is difficult. I mean add to the schema. Okay. And it's necessarily incomplete. Okay. It cannot be complete. Just like any structural design, it's going to have flaws and it's going to have gaps. And so there are going to be things that fall through that because of the permanent, expensive to change, and inflexible pieces present a challenge. And then we talked about this mental model mismatch. And we see it all the time. We see it all the time. One of the challenges in communication is that 2 different people will use the same word for something, but mean somewhat different things when they say it. And this is the inverse of the blue-green versus aqua question. Okay. When I say aqua, I'm envisioning a particular color in my head. Well, you might not envision that exact same color, but we both use the term aqua. Okay. Now, that's a subtle example, but there are examples that are much more, much more damaging as we try to communicate with each other. And we just miss. Okay. So that mental model mismatch is huge in the group information management space. And we talked about how costly it is. And the cost is based on users having to translate from their own natural mental model of information storage and categorization into someone else's. And when I categorize things for myself, it's very fast. Okay, kind of back to Daniel Kahneman and thinking fast and slow. It's a quick process for me to go, oh, that's aqua. Okay, in my own mind. It's much slower and more difficult for me to predict what you're going to understand as aqua. And so that translation step is really costly in terms of our attention and the time we have to spend, the mental energy we have to spend doing it. So those challenges really are just a function of, well, we're doing it the best way we know how, you know? So then another challenge is finding information when we go back to look for information, when we search for information, okay? Because in that shared model where there was a single schema, I go put it somewhere that makes sense to me, and I expect you to be able to find it. Well, there's no reason why we should expect that you have the same mental model as I do. I mean, we can communicate a lot, but absolute fidelity on this is hard to achieve. Okay? We see teams miscommunicating all the time in management practice and in management coaching. And so people say, well, yay, we created global search. Okay. And Google did this for us, and it's a great tool and technique. It was thought to be impossible prior to Google doing it. And so they've hauled off and done it, and they've made the entire web, all the zillions upon zillions upon zillions, searchable. Okay. But search is not an outstanding finding mechanism. Well, let me say it differently. Search is not an outstanding refinding mechanism. So when we think about information management, there's finding, which is more associated with becoming aware of information the first time. Whether it's intentionally looking for it or just becoming aware of it, doesn't really matter. That's finding. Okay. And so what we do is we keep it, we keep a copy of the information or an artifact or something. And then later, when it's time to use the information, we have to go through the process of refinding it. Okay. And search is not great for refinding a specific item in a vast store. I'm sure you've had the experience of finding a great resource on the internet, Google, okay? And you refer to it and you use it and it's great. And then 2 weeks later, you run more searches trying to find that same piece of information. So you've experienced how hard this can be, okay? Re-identifying specific sources is a huge challenge when it comes to search. And then finally, if we go and put a document somewhere, so let's say I store a document in our group repository according to the group schema. Okay, I'm translating where it needs to go because I don't think the way the schema thinks, and so I stick it out there and put it somewhere. Well, to the degree that I've translated my thinking out to the group schema, the more translating I have to do, the more likely it is that I won't be able to replicate that translation as seamlessly the second time. So I can put things out in somebody else's schema and lose them. Okay. And if I put it there and lose it, then it's going to be really hard for anybody else to find except by luck. Okay. So documents are easily lost if they're misplaced. It's not like, you misplace one of your dishes because it's got a physical reality. It's sitting somewhere. You just got to go find it. But misplaced information just about disappears. Okay. Because it doesn't have that physical reality. So all these things are a challenge. We alluded to filing errors, for example, misplaced things. Okay. And it's hard to know if you filed it accurately. One of the great things about computers is they do a lot of error correction. They check on us and make sure that we're doing things well. And they go ballistic if something goes sideways, error messages and things. Well, information storage systems struggle to do that. Okay. Because the system itself is not built to discern where the information needs to be stored. Okay, that's a very difficult challenge. And so we let people do it. Okay, but it's hard to know if you've made an error in storing it, right? And then finally, with any group information system, there's going to be immediately some concerns about security, about data security. And this is a really important topic. It's absolutely critical that we manage certain types of information very, very securely. Okay. In fact, the best practice in managing information that's very, very sensitive is to not show it to people, to let the system deal with it. Okay. So modern credit card processing on the internet, the company that's selling you the stuff probably never touches your credit card number. Okay. All that's through a third party. And that way, the company can focus on doing what it does well, which is making and selling product. And then the intermediary that manages the card transaction can focus on the security in those pieces. Okay. So that's a very important innovation in information security. If you don't want something to get out, then make sure no people ever see it. Okay. And then you can put it behind these firm walls of a computer. You know, we think about data security and we think about, okay, well, if somebody leaves the company, okay, then they're going to take all the important information with them, or at least they're going to take a copy. So they're going to have our sensitive information. A good example is there used to be a lot of concern about salespeople taking the customer list when they left the company. And then 2 weeks later, calling all those customers again, okay, and saying, "Hey, I'm Larry. I've moved to a new company, but we sell the same product, so I'd like to talk to you about the product that I'm now representing." But anytime information is consumed by an individual, a copy of that information is made. So the fact that I read something in a book, okay, means I now own a copy of that information. It might not be a high fidelity copy, but it is a copy. Okay. And the organization I'm with cannot make me forget that. So the document itself, security of the document itself is important, but it doesn't completely contain the information, right? Managing the document does not mean that you own the sole copy of that information, okay? Because people read it and use it and learn it, and then you can't wipe that knowledge out when they leave. So in some ways, that part of the security focus is really just about facing an impossible task, okay? But because we're building a group information system, we, the organization, feel like we need to protect that data. And it's a very expensive, time-consuming process to do that. All right. So those are just, some issues with the way that we're doing it now, and they're costly. So instead, imagine that we have a team or a group of people that are very good at managing their own information, and that we have a shared repository of information that allows the individuals to link to the information rather than maintaining their own copy of the information. And this solves a lot of problems with data integrity. Okay. It doesn't solve many security problems, but the individual does not have a copy of the information. There is only one copy. So people can read it and they might could print it out if they wanted to, but they don't have the file actually like downloaded in the traditional ways that you would if you were trying to share documents. So if everybody's a good personal information manager, then they know how to effectively deal with the pointer to the information. Okay. Individuals build their own card catalog. Now, everybody knows what a card catalog is, or used to know. Now it's all moved to computers. But a card catalog is an index, really, of little cards that are organized according to some schema, perhaps alphabetically by author name. Now, the books on the shelf are not organized alphabetically by author name, usually. Okay. But the cards are. Okay. And so if we're all individual, good personal information managers, then we all build our own card catalog to the shared information. And then the schema of the shared information itself matters a whole lot less, if at all. Okay. So we're each building our own card catalog, and we can help each other build the card catalog. That's pretty straightforward. But if we're good personal information managers, it happens automatically. So you have a link to a document that is, let's call it a sales call script. Okay. Well, every time you need it, you hit the link and you pull it up, but you're pulling an image from the stored document. Okay. And then when you're done with it, you put it away. You may even update it while you have it out. Okay. That's fine. But you put it back where it came from. Right. You don't have to make a copy and keep it locally on your machine because you've got these links, the term is like symbolic link, I think, in computing. You've got a link out to it, so you can find it whenever you want to. And that link is embedded in a card, just like in a card catalog. It has the Library of Congress number. If that's how your library is organized, it has the number there. The number doesn't mean anything to you. It's just a mapping scheme for you to walk to where the book is, or give that number to somebody and they'll go get it for you. Okay, so that card catalog is an index, a link back out to information that, because it doesn't need to be stored for user findability, can be stored in the way the librarians think best. So they understand the Library of Congress cataloging system. Okay, they know that 400 means history or whatever it means. Okay, don't take my word for it. And then what some of the sub branches mean. And so they begin to learn this system and use it automatically. But the individual users of the library don't need to know that system. All they need to know is how to work a card catalog. And it's a brilliant idea, okay? Because it serves both needs. All right. So as we do this well, okay, then we can learn to build our own card catalog towards a repository of information that is organized. The schema is controlled by another person, and we don't care what that is particularly. Okay. And then our card can contain descriptive information about the document that is at the other end of the link. Okay. You see, I'm thinking about a little note card that has a blue internal Windows file link, C:\\/ blah, 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 right? They're about this long. I'm holding my hands about 18 inches apart. Okay. And we can then, in the rest of the card, we can attach other links that make sense. We can talk to ourselves about what that information represents for us. We can tag it and file it where we need to. We can move it around how we need to, the card. Okay. And it doesn't affect the storage of the group's storage. It doesn't affect the location of that item. So other people that have a link to it, it's still at the end of their link as well. Okay. So that's this card catalog concept. Now, when we think about that, okay, well, Larry, what's the mechanism here? Okay. What are we trying to do? All right. How do we operate? Well, we find the document that we're interested in, and we probably find it by asking somebody else. Okay. If we didn't create and store the document ourselves, we probably asked somebody else for the document. And typically they would send us a copy on an email, okay, or some such mechanism. So that's how we find documents to begin with, okay? Now, as we find a document, we put a reference to that document in a card in our own card catalog, okay, which makes it cheap and easy for us to find it again, because our card catalog works the way our brain works, because we're good personal information managers, okay? And so we create that in our own file, and we use it, and we make notes about it, and all these, really important things. Metadata, okay? One of the problems with metadata about a document is if it has multiple users, each of those users may use the document in a different way. Okay, if you're making sales calls, you're using the document as a script. If you're the manager, you're using the document as instructions. Okay, and those are two different uses. And so we've got to capture that. They then store the link, the users then store the link in their own personal information management system, okay, like an attention compass system that I can teach you how to build. If you're interested in this stuff, just give me a call, okay, or shoot me an email. I'm easy to find. It's larry@dobusywrite.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn pretty easily, okay? And we can talk about this if you're curious or interested. I love to talk about this sort of stuff because I think it's immensely valuable to your team. Okay. It's very difficult to measure how much time is wasted on individual team members trying to find a shared document in a group repository. It's hard to measure, but based on your own personal experience with this kind of situation, you can guess how large it is. Okay. And then the key to continuing to make this system work is that when somebody asks for information, you share with them the link to it. You don't give them a copy of the information. Okay. You say, hey, the document you're looking for is at the end of this link. Blah. Right. And then they can access it just the same way you do. It doesn't move, so nobody else loses it. Okay. Any updates to it are made to the original, which is a manageable process. Okay. So these are the mechanisms by which we deliver this value. Okay. Now, when we look at this, and what I like to call it is personally empowered group information management. Okay. It's personally empowered. So I get to build my own card catalog to help me understand the group information repository. I build my own map, right? And it's not hard. It's very straightforward. People who use the attention compass concept will tell you that it just becomes part of the work. Okay. It becomes the system by which we do what we do. Okay. It's very effective at a fairly low cost. So what does this do? Well, refinding becomes much easier. Okay. All I've got to do is tell myself where this card is. And I can do that in my own personal system much better than I can trying to translate into somebody else's schema. Okay. Another thing, another benefit is the group storage structure becomes less important. So the structure of the main repository itself begins to not matter. And this goes back to the librarian card catalog example that we talked about a minute ago. Okay. You may not even know that they use the Library of Congress organizing system versus the Dewey Decimal System, just because it simply doesn't matter to you. You go to the card catalog, it produces a number. You look at the signs, oh, the 300s are over there. And you walk over there and pick out the book. You don't even need to know the schema. And so that is a system design criteria that we call separation of concerns that detangles and makes the entire system simpler. Okay. So if I can build my own card catalog, I don't care how you store it. Okay, just as long as I can get a pointer to it, right? And then the group information management problem just gets easier. Okay, that's part of this complexity decrease is, hey, I don't care what your card catalog looks like. Just make one that works for you. Hey, here's the links that you'll need. Off you go. Okay. It also addresses the problem of the inflexibility of schema, right? If the librarian needs to move a document, okay, then if the system had two-way linking, or maybe they can keep a record of who's accessed that document recently, and they can send an email and say, hey, you used to use this link to find this document. As of Tuesday, you're going to be using that link to find the document. Okay. And then things can move around pretty easily relative to the almost definitely static structure of a group schema, because if you change the group schema, then everybody in the group's got to relearn the new schema. It's expensive. And then finally, the act of becoming a better personal information manager, okay, also incorporates this idea of improving each team member's task and attention management with the productivity benefits that we talk about all the time. And it makes them a better teammate. They're better able to help others find information. They're better able to deliver on their commitments, to offer practical help to their teammates. They're more calm and more relaxed, and less stressed out about how much they have to do. Okay, all of which makes them better employees and better teammates. Okay, so all of these benefits of empowered personal information management, personally empowered group information management. Okay, and the cost is very low, right? All people have to do is learn how to be good personal information managers, and the rest becomes really easy. In fact, I would suggest that the ROI on teaching everybody to be a good personal information manager versus the spend that you can avoid on these big tools to try to manage a group repository like SharePoint, okay? That I can train 10 people for less than $10,000, okay? Your price may vary depending on when you hear this. And you can't touch a group information management system for $10,000. You can't even get a good CRM for 10 users for $10,000, okay? And the system persists and it's robust over time, okay? Somebody leaves, you lose their card catalog, it doesn't matter. Nobody else used it. And so it's no longer a challenge here. So all that cost saved versus the cost of training folks to become good personal information managers, it's huge. It's huge. So, let's think back through where we've gotten in our talk today. So we've talked about group information management, okay? And we've talked about the challenges and expense and complexity of group information management systems. We've isolated the causes of that complexity, okay? And we've introduced personal information management. And if you don't understand personal information management, there's a ton of other podcast episodes you can listen to, right? And I'll give you some specific links back into that, but you can see how personal information management works. And then you can understand better how personally empowered group information management would work as well. Or you can just call me and I'll explain it to your whole crew. Okay. Again, email me, Larry@dobusywrite.com if you're interested in this stuff, or reach out to me on LinkedIn, direct message me, whatever. I'm not hard to find on LinkedIn. I love to talk about this stuff. Okay. So we've looked at all these areas of challenge and we've applied personal information management to it, and we've seen the potential benefits of that. Okay. Not only do you get greater productivity from each individual on the team, but you also eliminate a huge percentage of the waste that is caused by the fact that the team members face some foreign schema when they're trying to look for information that they need to refine information. Okay. It's a huge challenge and a huge cost. It's very expensive, but it's hard to measure. So, conclusion. The overall current approach to group information management emphasizes centralized, rigid schemas and global search. Okay. That was a revolutionary idea when it happened, but now in modern computing, it's suboptimal. Okay. And because of that, it leads to increased frustration. It leads to lost information. It leads to inefficiency from the team members. Okay. For me, I tell people that we're trying to solve the problem because we can't solve the problem well because we're looking at it through the wrong end of the telescope. Okay. We're starting with the group and saying, okay, how do groups manage information? Well, that's a difficult question to answer because we don't even really know how individuals manage information, right? So, how do people organize their information? It's a tough question. Okay. They know how to do it usually and can be taught to do it better easily, but the actual mechanisms there are really hard to dig down into. Okay. So if we really want to foster shared knowledge and group understanding, which is the sine qua non of a team, okay, why have one if they're not sharing an understanding of something? Companies, organizations have to prioritize and invest in enhancing each team member's personal information management skills. Okay. So when individuals become proficient at creating their own card catalog, which is what a personal information system does, okay, then they have their own system of pointers and link to shared knowledge and metadata on what these different documents mean, and they're able to seemingly move the documents around in their own repository to suit them best, okay? Then the entire group's ability to access and utilize and build on collective information transforms dramatically because it's easier for everybody. Now, if we can shift our focus that direction, the complicated challenge of group information management becomes much more straightforward. Okay, it just gets easier because the librarian can have their schema, each individual team member can have their schema. They send links back and forth instead of documents. They're able to update documents on the fly, assuming that's correct behavior for them. And it just, the problem largely just dissolves. Okay. And then we're able to move on with a good storage, and people are able to find what they need to find when they need to find it. And so in addition to making a very, very difficult problem easier, okay, it also yields the other benefits that we talked about. All right. When people become good managers of their own information, they simultaneously become better managers of their task and their own attention. These are important skills that benefit both the individual and the organization. Okay. The individuals are more relaxed. They feel like their job is somewhat easier. And the organization gets some of the benefit of the individual's increased productivity. Okay. I mean, it's almost a magic sauce here, right? So if you're thinking about investing in one of these complex group information management systems, okay, that are built according to the kind of logic that we outlined previously, a librarian who organizes things the way they think they should be organized and then tries to teach everybody that organizational schema, okay, then I want you to call me and let's talk about this thing, right? Think about your team's ability to manage their own information. There's no law that says a group repository is the best way to go. Okay. There are laws around information security, sure. And that may imply a central repository just because of the security concerns. Okay. But that doesn't mean that you can't do this, right? It's just a sort of organizational habit we've created as much as anything else. Oh, well, we'll store it in some big group schema and everything will be fine. Okay. Well, I'm trying to shed a little light on that situation. So think about it. Okay. Let's think about getting your own, pilot a small team. I'll show you how. Okay. And then watch them operate around information versus another one of your teams. Okay. And we'll see this power. It's cheap, it's effective, the ROI is huge. Okay. Versus implementing some big complex top-down system. Okay. So if you're managing a team or if you're on a team and you see this challenge of sharing information, let's get together and talk about it. Okay. I don't think it's a hard problem to solve. I really don't. And if we can just change our perspective on how to manage it. Okay. And that's a challenge, changing our perspective and doing things the way, oh, nobody else is doing it this way, Larry. I know. Okay. And they're all suffering because of it. So get an experiment together. Let's get a pilot going. Let's get this thing happening in your organization. And I think you'll see lots of benefit from it. There's lots of misinformation out there about how personal information management works, and even more about how group information management should work. Okay. And so I think if we can focus on empowering individuals, then we can really unlock a much more effective and collaborative future for the knowledge that the organization makes its living. I'll leave it there for now. This is Larry Tribble, Ph.D. Thanks for taking some time to improve your task and information management on the Do Busy Right podcast. The show is dedicated to helping you think about how to get better at working. And we do this by improving your attention and your focus. I believe that your work is not just about your job, but about all the tasks that you do to turn yourself, your environment, and your relationships into what you want them to be. What we're really talking about here is the underpinnings of becoming who you want to be. The primary way I help people is through coaching the Attention Compass process. Attention Compass is 4 workflows and a tool set that support our information, task, and attention management. I help people with big goals to build habits that put them in a position to achieve. We do this by eliminating wasted time and wasted attention. If you'd like to know more, you can find me on LinkedIn or go to dobusywrite.com for more information. Have a good week, more effective and less exhausted. Do busy right.